Los Angeles, July 1934. The curtains in the Biltmore Hotel suite are drawn tight against the afternoon sun. The air smells faintly of cigar smoke and furniture polish. A silver tray of untouched coffee sits between men who are not drinking it. Louis B. Mayer is smiling. Not a broad smile, just the corner of his mouth lifting as he leans back in the upholstered chair, gold watch chain resting against his vest. He adjusts his cufflink, glances around the room, and lets the silence stretch a little too long. Across from him sit the men who own Hollywood. Jack Warner, Adolph Zukor, Harry Cohn, executives who built empires out of celluloid and electricity. They are used to controlling rooms like this, used to being the loudest voices, used to deciding which stories America dreams about. But today no one is speaking. At the far end of the room sits Joseph Breen. He isn't dressed like a mogul, no diamond tie pins, no theatrical gestures, just a dark suit pressed flat, a narrow face, still eyes. He doesn't fidget. Mayer finally breaks the silence. So, he says, voice casual, almost amused, I suppose the church men are going to start writing our scripts now. A few soft laughs, reflexive, nervous. Harry Cohn exhales through his nose, Warner shifts in his chair. Zukor studies the rim of his coffee cup. The joke hangs in the air, thinner than Mayer expected. Joseph Breen does not laugh. He does not respond immediately either. He simply looks at Mayer. It's not anger, it's not outrage, it's something colder, something measured. The room quiets without anyone asking it to. Because everyone in that suite understands what's actually being discussed. It isn't theology, it isn't morality, it's leverage. Outside that hotel room, something dangerous is building. For months, the Catholic Legion of Decency has been mobilizing quietly across the country, parish by parish, city by city. Sermons delivered on Sunday mornings urging congregations to refuse attendance at immoral films, lists of condemned pictures circulated, promises signed by millions of parishioners vowing to boycott. It is not loud, it is not violent. But it is organized. And Hollywood, for the first time, feels the ground shifting beneath it. The production code had existed on paper since 1930, a set of moral guidelines designed to calm public outrage. Studios agreed to it in theory, they nodded, they printed copies. Then they ignored it. Adultery sold tickets, gangsters drew crowds, suggestion, innuendo, seduction, these were profitable. The studios believed they were untouchable. Until now. Joseph Breen is not just a representative of the church, he has just been appointed to head the newly empowered Production Code Administration. And this time, enforcement will not be symbolic. This time, films without a code seal will not be distributed by the major exchanges. And without distribution, there is no profit. Breen finally speaks. His voice is soft, controlled, almost polite. No one is interested in writing your scripts, Mr. Mayer. He pauses. But without our approval, you won't be showing them. The words are simple, delivered without heat. But something shifts in the room. Because everyone understands what he means. Distribution networks, many of them influenced by Catholic investors and regional theater owners, are ready to refuse non-compliant films. The Legion's boycott is not theoretical. It's already cutting into box office numbers in cities like Chicago and Boston. Breen doesn't need to threaten. The math does it for him. Mayer's smile fades just slightly. He leans forward now, elbows on his knees. You're suggesting, he says carefully, that the industry hands creative control to a committee. Breen holds his gaze. I'm suggesting, he replies, that the alternative will be far more expensive. Silence again. The kind that presses against your ears. Jack Warner clears his throat but says nothing. Cohn studies Breen's face as if trying to detect weakness. There isn't any. This is not a shouting match, there are no raised fists. Just a quiet acknowledgement that power has entered the room wearing a different uniform. For years, Hollywood has operated like a kingdom. Studio heads could bury scandals, shape reputations, decide careers. They controlled contracts, gossip columns, distribution chains. But this threat comes from outside their walls. And it's moral. Moral pressure doesn't negotiate the same way. Mayer straightens in his chair. You realize, he says, voice measured, that we employ thousands of people, actors, writers, crew. You're asking us to alter entire productions. Breen nods once. I'm aware. No sympathy, no hesitation. Then you're aware what it would mean if films are delayed, Mayer continues. Another pause. I am. He doesn't blink. The message is unmistakable. Delay them. Rewrite them. Cut them. Or watch theaters sit empty. The executives glance at one another now, no longer amused, each calculating privately, each thinking about the films currently in production, scripts already shot, scenes already edited. How many would fail under strict enforcement? How many would need to be destroyed? The coffee has gone cold. Breen reaches into his briefcase slowly, deliberately. The faint click of the clasp sounds louder than it should. He places a folder on the table. Inside are proposed enforcement mechanisms, clear authority, mandatory seals, mandatory compliance. No seal, no distribution. The rule is that simple. Mayer doesn't open the folder immediately. Instead, he looks at Breen. And for the first time, the balance of control feels uncertain. Hollywood has weathered scandals before: the Fatty Arbuckle trial, drug deaths, sex rumors, congressional murmurs. But those were storms that passed. This feels structured, organized, permanent. Mayer finally speaks again, quieter now. And if we refuse? Breen doesn't raise his voice. If you refuse, he says, the Legion will make sure the country knows. Another pause. And the theaters will respond accordingly. No drama, just consequence. In that moment, the men who built dream factories understand something uncomfortable. The audience can be guided, mobilized, turned away. And they do not control that lever anymore. The room feels smaller now. No one laughs. Outside, Los Angeles traffic hums faintly beneath the windows. The world goes on, unaware that inside this suite, a negotiation is redefining American cinema. Mayer glances at the other executives. No one meets his eyes. Because they're already thinking the same thing. If Breen wins this, the era of creative defiance ends tonight. And if he loses, the financial damage could cripple them all. Joseph Breen folds his hands and waits. He doesn't need to press further. The silence is doing the work. And in that silence, Louis B. Mayer realizes something he hasn't felt in years. He is not the most powerful man in the room. No one reaches for the folder. It sits on the polished table like an unsigned contract at a funeral. Mayer finally breaks eye contact first. It's subtle, just a glance downward, but in rooms like this, subtlety is everything. Jack Warner shifts in his seat and clears his throat again, louder this time. Joe, he says, forcing a familiarity that doesn't exist, we've had a code for 4 years, we agreed to it, we've cooperated. Breen turns his head slightly toward Warner. You agreed to a suggestion, he says evenly, not an authority. The correction lands without aggression, it doesn't need it. Warner leans back, jaw tightening. Adolf Zucker, older, quieter, steeples his fingers. He has survived longer than most in this industry by sensing which direction the wind is about to blow. He studies Breen's face carefully, looking for compromise. There isn't any. Outside this suite, telegrams have already been sent to dioceses across the country. Bishops are prepared to issue formal condemnations of specific films. Lists are ready. It is coordinated. And coordination is something Hollywood respects. Mayer finally opens the folder. The pages are neat, structured, clear categories of don'ts and be carefuls, explicit prohibitions, miscegenation, excessive and lustful kissing, justified revenge, clergy portrayed as villains, crime shown without moral consequence. Every line is a potential rewrite. Every rewrite is money. Harry Cohn exhales slowly. You want to sit in on production meetings. Breen shakes his head once. No. Then what? We review scripts before filming, we review cuts before release. Nothing receives distribution without the code seal. The word distribution lingers. Because distribution is oxygen. Without it, even the most expensive film suffocates. Mayer flips another page. You're asking us to trust that you won't suffocate creativity. I'm asking you, Breen replies, to trust that the American public is watching. Another quiet sentence. Another tightening of the room. For years, the studios have operated under the assumption that controversy sells, that audiences enjoy danger, seduction, criminal charisma, and they weren't wrong. Pre-code films thrived on moral ambiguity, gangsters who died but looked heroic doing it, women who took lovers and survived, dialogue layered with suggestion. But the Depression has changed the mood of the country. Desperation sharpens moral panic. And the Legion of Decency understands that. Millions of signed pledges, entire congregations promising to avoid immoral films. Theater owners in heavily Catholic cities already reporting drops in attendance when a film is publicly condemned. Breen doesn't need to threaten boycotts, they are already happening. He simply formalizes the mechanism. Mayer looks up again. You realize, he says carefully, that our contracts with actors and directors are built around creative freedom. Breen nods. And your contracts with exhibitors are built around attendance. There it is again. Always returning to revenue. Breen isn't arguing morality alone, he's arguing business survival. Warner leans forward, what about films already completed? Submitted for review, Breen says, cuts may be required. May be required, Cohn repeats quietly as if testing the weight of it. He's thinking about scenes already shot, expensive sets already dismantled, stars already paid. What does it cost to reshoot, to edit, to scrap entirely? Breen watches the calculations unfold behind their eyes. This is not ideological warfare. It's logistical. And logistics can break empires. Mayer closes the folder slowly. And if a studio releases a picture without your seal? Breen doesn't blink. The major exchanges will decline it. Warner frowns, you don't control the exchanges. No, Breen says calmly, but you do. A beat. And you won't risk them. The realization is uncomfortable. The studios collectively control distribution through their theater chains. But if one studio breaks ranks and releases a condemned film, the others would have incentive to isolate it to protect the industry as a whole. Mutual pressure. Breen has understood something critical. Hollywood's greatest strength, its vertical integration, can also become a cage. Silence again. The room feels warmer now. Mayer removes his jacket, folds it carefully over the chair. A small gesture, but it signals something. The conversation is no longer dismissible. Joe, he says quietly, we've built this industry from nothing, from Nickelodeons and backlots. We survived scandals, we survived the crash. I'm aware, Breen says. Then understand what you're asking. Breen leans forward for the first time. I understand exactly what I'm asking. His voice lowers slightly. I'm asking for discipline. Not censorship. Not morality. Discipline. The word lands differently. It suggests hierarchy. Chain of command. Submission to structure. And that is what unsettles Mayer most. Because Hollywood moguls answer to shareholders, to profits, to competition. They do not answer to moral supervisors. Until now. Outside the room, the industry is already nervous. Writers whisper about tightened guidelines, directors worry about scenes under scrutiny, actors fear roles being softened, reshaped. Careers could pivot overnight. The Legion's public campaign is only the visible layer. The real power sits here, in this quiet negotiation. If Breen's authority becomes formal, scripts will be filtered before imagination reaches the screen. Desire will be trimmed. Crime will be punished. Ambiguity will shrink. The studios built their empires on fantasy, but fantasy, Breen insists, must serve order. Mayer studies Breen again. You don't raise your voice, he says quietly. There's no need, Breen replies. Another small line. Another shift. Because the quietest person in the room is dictating terms. Warner rubs his temples. What guarantees do we have that standards won't keep tightening? Breen's answer is immediate. You have the code. And you interpret it, Warner says. Yes. No apology. The power is explicit now. Interpretation is control. Cohn glances at Mayer. If we don't unify on this, he says carefully, the Legion will pick us off one by one. There it is. The first open admission of vulnerability. Mayer hears it. Breen hears it too. The moguls have always competed fiercely. They sabotage one another's releases, steal talent, undercut deals. But this threat demands solidarity. And solidarity requires concession. Mayer looks at the closed curtains, then back at the table. For a moment he seems older. He built MGM into a kingdom of glamour, stars groomed like royalty, public images polished and protected. But image control is different from moral oversight. He knows if the Legion intensifies its campaign, politicians will notice. Congressional hearings are not impossible. Federal intervention is a greater threat than Breen. Breen represents a private solution. Compliance now might prevent government regulation later. It's the kind of calculation that keeps empires intact. But it requires surrender. Mayer finally says, almost to himself, we'd be policing ourselves. Breen answers softly, you'd be preserving yourselves. The difference is semantic, but powerful. Warner stands, walks toward the window, parts the curtains slightly. Sunlight spills into the dim room. Hollywood Boulevard glints in the distance. Dreams being sold in neon and plaster. He lets the curtain fall back into place. The room dims again. He turns back toward the table. How quickly would this begin, he asks. Breen's response is immediate. Immediately. No grace period. No slow adjustment. Immediate compliance. The word echoes. Mayer exhales slowly. He realizes something essential in that moment. This isn't negotiation. It's timing. Breen arrived with leverage because the moment was ripe. Public anxiety, religious mobilization, economic fragility. The studios can resist. But resistance carries risk. And risk in 1934 feels heavier than it did before the crash. Mayer looks at the other executives. One by one they avoid his gaze. Not out of defiance, but out of recognition. They are cornered. Not loudly. Quietly. Breen gathers his papers, leaving the folder behind. I'll expect your confirmation, he says. He stands. No handshake offered. No dramatic exit. Just the soft click of the hotel suite door closing behind him. The moguls remain seated. No one speaks for several seconds. Because they all know what just happened. And none of them are certain how much of their kingdom still belongs to them. The door closes softly behind Joseph Breen. No slam, no final remark. Just the quiet sound of a latch settling into place. For a moment, no one in the suite moves. The city outside continues as if nothing has shifted. Streetcars rattle, car horns drift faintly upward from the boulevard. Somewhere below, a bellhop laughs. Inside the room, the air feels heavier. Jack Warner is the first to speak. Well, he says, but there is no sentence after it. Louis B. Mayer remains seated, elbows on his knees, staring at the folder Breen left behind. The production code administration seal is embossed on the cover. Small, official, permanent. Harry Cohn walks back to the table and flips the folder open again, scanning as if hoping the language will look softer the second time. It doesn't. Zucker speaks quietly. If we refuse, the Legion escalates. No one disagrees. The Legion of Decency had already organized millions of Catholics to sign pledges promising to avoid condemned films. Parish bulletins listed titles. Priests spoke from pulpits about moral corruption in cinema. Theater owners in cities with heavy Catholic populations were beginning to feel the pressure. If a studio defied the code publicly, it would not be a silent protest. It would be a coordinated one. And coordination is what frightens industrialists. Mayer finally straightens. He's betting we won't risk Congress, he says. Because that is the unspoken shadow over the entire meeting. For years, the federal government had hinted at possible regulation of motion pictures. There had been local censorship boards, state interventions. If moral outrage grew louder, Washington could step in. Self-regulation under Breen might protect the studios from federal law. It's a trade. Control for protection. Warner rubs his jaw. If one of us breaks ranks, we all suffer. That is the truth no one wants to admit. Hollywood's power depends on unity when threatened from outside. If one studio released a condemned film without a code seal, the others would be pressured to distance themselves. Exhibitors would hesitate, bankers would worry. Risk spreads quickly. Cohn closes the folder slowly. "So we agree," he says quietly. It's not a vote. It's a surrender. No one raises a hand. But no one objects. In that silence, the decision is made. Not with drama. Not with signatures. Just with understanding. Within weeks, the Production Code Administration becomes fully empowered. No film from a major studio can be released without its seal of approval. Scripts begin arriving at Breen's office in stacks. And that is where the real shift begins. Writers accustomed to clever insinuation now receive typed notes demanding revisions, dialogue softened, bedroom scenes shortened, costumes adjusted, criminals rewritten to ensure punishment is clear and moral balance restored. The changes are rarely explosive. They are precise. A kiss shortened by seconds. A line of dialogue rephrased. A villain given remorse. A woman's autonomy redirected into marriage. Small edits, but consistent. And consistency reshapes culture. Directors begin adjusting themselves preemptively, avoiding costly reshoots. Producers hire code-conscious writers, entire genres subtly recalibrate. The gangster film survives, but its heroes die more emphatically. The femme fatale survives, but her power is blunted by consequence. Ambiguity narrows. Morality becomes explicit. Joseph Breen rarely appears on set. He doesn't need to. His authority sits on paper. And paper travels. Inside studio offices, a new phrase circulates: will Breen pass it? It becomes a reflex. Creative ambition now carries an invisible checkpoint. The fear is not of arrest. Not of public shamming. It is of delay. Of financial loss. Of an expensive production halted because a seal will not be granted. The quietest threat is often the most effective. Mayer adapts quickly. He was never sentimental about art. He was strategic about business. If compliance ensures stability, then compliance becomes policy. He begins instructing his producers to consult the code office early, avoid confrontation, avoid headlines, avoid risk. Other studios follow. Not because they agree philosophically, but because the cost of defiance is calculable. And too high. The Legion of Decency continues issuing ratings, but the tone shifts. With the code enforced, the number of condemned films drops, public campaigns quiet. The threat recedes. On the surface, it looks like harmony. But something fundamental has changed. Hollywood is no longer experimenting recklessly with morality. It is curating it. And the audience never sees the scenes that are removed. Never hears the lines that are rewritten. They only see the final version. Over time, a generation grows up believing this filtered version is natural. That romance must conclude with moral clarity. That crime must never feel seductive without punishment. That authority, especially religious authority, must be portrayed with respect. The code doesn't just edit films. It edits expectations. Behind closed doors, some directors resent Breen deeply. They complain about narrow interpretations, about art reduced to compliance. But they complain quietly. Because Breen does not shout. He does not grandstand. He simply withholds approval. And without approval, there is no release. No premiere. No profit. Mayer occasionally reflects on that afternoon in the Biltmore suite. He never publicly describes it as defeat. He frames it as pragmatism. Protection. But he remembers the moment. The smirk that didn't land. The sentence delivered without emotion. And the realization that the industry he helped build could be redirected by someone who never stepped in front of a camera. Years pass. The code remains in force through World War II and into the 1950s. It shapes narratives of heroism, romance, justice. Audiences accept it because they never saw what might have been. And Breen remains largely invisible to the public. No celebrity. No marquee name. Just a signature at the bottom of approval certificates. When the code eventually weakens in the 1960s, replaced by the rating system, a different kind of freedom returns to cinema. But by then, 3 decades of storytelling have been shaped by that quiet authority. 3 decades where risk was calculated against moral oversight. And it all traces back to rooms like that hotel suite in 1934. No headlines announced the shift that day. No dramatic confrontation. Just a joke, a smirk, and a sentence delivered calmly. Without our approval, you won't be showing them. The power of it wasn't in the volume. It was in the infrastructure behind it. Hollywood didn't collapse. It adjusted. It survived. But from that moment forward, every script carried an invisible presence. A question hovering over every daring idea. Will it pass? And long after Joseph Breen left the room, that question lingered. Not loudly, but permanently.